Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Simply 30. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Danielle.
And we are going to be talking today. We're actually going to be reacting to a different podcast. We both listened to a podcast recently.
It's Calley and Casey Means, the truth about Ozempic, the pill, and how Big Pharma keeps you sick on the Tucker Carlson show, which the podcast was actually sent to me by one of my friends because she knows that I've deep dived into a lot of these issues. So I thought it'd be fun to send it to Alyssa to check out and see, what our thoughts are, our opinions of it, and kind of just get our reactions of some of the topics that they cover.
Yeah, so brief overview before we get into the podcast itself. Calley and Casey Means are a Harvard Business School graduate, and a Stanford Medical School graduate. They're a brother and sister who recently wrote a book called Good Energy, and that was sort of the basis of the conversation, was things that they learned during their research and both of their respective careers. They both have since left those jobs and are working full-time, spreading this information and helping to kind of change the way that people in America view food, view healthcare, and then in tandem, the economy, our government, our social structures, things like that. So definitely an interesting, full disclosure, have not read the book, just listened to them speak during the podcast.
So after listening to the podcast, would you want to read the book?
Oh, I would definitely read the book. Yeah, I mean, I would be, we'll talk about this as we get more into the podcast. I would definitely be interested to see an expansion on some of their ideas. Also, like, some additional, sources of where they get their information from. And then I would hope that when you pay for the book, you get additional solutions as opposed to just sort of an outline of the problems, which I'm hopeful would be in there. I obviously haven't read the book, so I don't know, but I would definitely be interested in reading the book. Yeah. I don't know if you...
No, I definitely would too. I agree with you. I think it'd be interesting to just see each of these expanded a little bit more. And, I mean, we'll talk about what they did talk about when it comes to solutions and just, our thoughts of that, our ideas of that, towards the end of the episode, but...
Yeah, so if you hear any cooing or potentially crying in the background, my daughter is co-hosting with us today, so probably won't hear it too much, but just in case, this is the life of a mother. She's just hanging out, so apologies in advance if you hear a little bit of her babbling in the background. But just a quick couple life updates from us. We're doing really well over here on my end of the household. We had really good response to our last episode, so thank you to everyone who took the time to listen. Thank you everyone who then took the time to reach out. I had really encouraging conversations with a lot of people, and I did tell Danielle a little bit about this. I had people from all different experiences of womanhood, people who are mothers and struggled with similar things postpartum, women who are mothers who didn't experience that postpartum but knew someone who did, or just wanted to share their love and support, people who aren't yet mothers who felt kind of validated in some of the fears that they had and felt encouraged by someone talking about it. And then I also heard from people who aren't mothers and maybe don't have plans to be a mother but just wanted to share their experiences with mental health in general. Yeah, I know. So, thank you so much to everyone who took the time to reach out. It is September as we're recording this, which is Suicide Awareness Month. So I think even more so, this conversation is just so potent and so time appropriate. Maternal mental health and mental health in general just needs to be so much more widely discussed, destigmatized, and healthcare for mental health care should just be so much more accessible than it is. And so anything that we can do, however big or little, to help make that a better reality for people, I'm glad that we're able to do it.
Yeah, even if it is on our small scale.
Yeah, listen, what is the thing? The biggest ripples start from a single drop.
Yeah.
This is our drop, baby.
Yeah, right.
But other than that, we're moving forward, I go back to work next week, which is wild. Cannot believe that it's already been 3 months. So I don't know if excited is the right word. I'm interested to see how this goes. I'm definitely going to miss my daughter when I'm at work, but I'm also excited to use more of my adult brain. And I do love my job, and I love the type of work that I do. So I'm excited to have a place to do that for a couple days a week.
Yeah, there's like a greatness about being able to be home all the time, but then you kind of lose that like structure and like normalcy of going to a job and having that like outlet, I guess, in a sense. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes for you. Yeah,
luckily the people I work for and with were super agreeable to me, like adapting a little bit of a hybrid schedule. So I'll be home 2 days a week and I'll be in office 3 days a week, which I think is a good transition, especially given, you know, I'm not trying to rock the boat of my mental health right now. And so I think an easy kind of part-time-ish type of schedule, being able to work from home a little bit, and going in office, I think it'll just make the transition smoother and not kind of upset everything that I've worked hard for over the last couple of weeks to get my brain back in check. So,
for me, I've just been, I'm working on actually opening up my own private practice for telehealth. So I've been in the process. Currently, right now, I'm working under another therapist as kind of like an independent contractor. So it's not too far off from what I'm already doing. It's just kind of gaining more skills in the area of the management side and kind of getting all that situated as well as the marketing side. So I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row for that. That's been taking up a lot of my time. And I've just been very focused on my sourdough journey this 2 weeks as well, as you might have seen if you follow us on Instagram as well. But for all you people out there that are doing it, it is like a full-time job in itself. So
yeah, Danielle has been just feverishly dedicated to perfecting her sourdough. But I will say I did try her last loaf, and it was very delicious. So
well, that was the 5th time that week. I failed 4 times in a row, and I was like, you know what? I'll take a little break. I'll come back on Monday. That night I was up till like 2 a.m. I'm like, no, I have to figure it out tomorrow. So did not take that break, but
failure is not the word I would use. You learned 4 times before you figured it out.
But then I just recently, because they say that you can put your sourdough starter in the fridge if you only make it like once a week.
Okay.
So that you don't have to feed it every day. So I put it in the fridge, and supposedly, I guess if you have a good starter, you only need to feed it like once or twice once you take it out of the fridge to then make a loaf and then put it back in. Well, I fed it like 4 times and nothing's happening, so I don't know if I killed it.
Oh, no.
So I'm trying to revive it, so stay tuned.
Oh, yeah, okay, so next time we'll see where Danielle is on her updated sourdough journey. I mean, like I said, the bread I had that you made was good, so whatever you did that time definitely worked. But yeah, and then last little update, for those of you that do follow us on our Instagram, a little brief kind of connection. This podcast is both like in conjunction and separate from our other venture, which is the Sorona Society, which is a community-based group that looks to connect women, especially women, but anyone who are looking for like meaningful connections through common interests. We're working on sort of rebranding and building that up a little bit. And one of the things that we're doing right now is a September reading challenge. The goal is to read 20 days for at least 20 minutes during the month of September. And so we have a little tracker that you can use over on our Instagram if you'd like to participate. When this episode goes up, you should still have time to join in. Maybe. But if not, any amount of time that you read is a good amount of time to read.
I was going to say, I just posted on our Instagram about, like, consistency and the importance of building habits and kind of how we have this mentality of, oh, well, you know, the challenge is 20 days, you know, for 20 minutes in September, and I started, you know, so I'm only going to get 18 days out of it, even if I read every day from, you know, here until the end of September. And I think we have to, like, change that mentality because the whole point of the challenge is just to like, get back into reading, like, use reading for an outlet, for stress, whatever, you know, you want to use it for, but kind of build up, you know, that habit again.
Yeah.
If it is something that you were interested in, or, you know, just build it up if it's never been something you were interested in. So, kind of changing our mentality around what it looks like to build habits and what consistency actually means, and, you know, that it's never too late to start, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who's a recovering all or nothing mindset person, definitely something to keep in mind that, you know, you don't always have to wait for the next week or the next month or the next year to start something. And, you know, there's always benefit. You know, one day is better than no days. And so even if all you can manage is this one day where you sit down and read for 20 minutes, that's better than none. So, and then at the end of the month, Danielle and I will be meeting up to discuss the books that we read. And we'll have that information on our Instagram for anyone that's local that would like to join us for a cup of coffee and a discussion of the books. This might parlay into maybe a more formalized book club through Serona Society, but this one is just a little bit more freeform, like Danielle said, just to build up that spark of wanting to read again. Because as adults, and especially as adult women, and especially as adult women mothers, we know it can be hard to find time for things that are just for ourselves. So. Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the episode. So let's see. Okay. Maddie wants me to keep rocking her with my foot, so we'll keep doing that. So where do we want to begin?
I think we can just start with maybe our overall impressions of the episode, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about, like, things that we agreed with, things that we didn't agree with, and the episode was varied. There was a lot of different types of, I would say, examples that they used, but it all sort of came back to the same central point. And so I think, you know, we can maybe talk about that central point and then go through each of the different areas that they expanded on as ways to highlight that. What would you say their central thesis was?
So I would say the central theme is kind of like our healthcare crisis, or not, I wouldn't say even healthcare, our health crisis in America, and it kind of themes around metabolic dysfunction is the term that kind of kept coming up, is just how this metabolic dysfunction stems into all these areas of, like, these diseases that are, you know, continuing to increase, infertility that's continuing to increase. So I would say it's kind of about that, and obviously with food, how our food industries relate to increasing that problem even more.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that they definitely pinned metabolic dysfunction as sort of the underlying driver of almost every other health issue that is becoming more prevalent into, you know, recent years. And something else that they talked about a lot was the economics of keeping America and Americans confused and sick.
Yes.
And I think that those were probably the two biggest points that they highlighted, and everything else just seemed to be ways to showcase how that has become very prevalent, and ways that both private corporations and government officials have either intentionally or by lack of knowledge and designed confusion made it so that we are, as a country, people being sick is good for profit.
Yes.
So I want to be transparent in the sense that I did start this episode with a bias for the host himself. Not a huge fan of Tucker Carlson. I tried my best to keep that in the background because that's not what the episode was about. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that the same guest could be on two different talk shows, and the host and their audience will drive some tone of the conversation. And so I did want to just preface that with the fact that I can't deny that I did not like Tucker Carlson. I warmed up to him a little bit during the episode. I think after everything that happened with him with Fox News, he has done a good job of trying to disconnect himself and figure out like what are his beliefs versus what he was.
Well, do you want to share what happened in case anybody doesn't know?
So Tucker Carlson used to be a correspondent on the Fox News network. Which is a very conservative, right-leaning based TV program, because they're not even legally allowed to call themselves like a news program because of the way that they're structured and it's very complicated. You can Google it and figure that out if you want to see the details of why they can't be called a news organization. But anyway, very conservative leaning, very right-wing leaning, and he was fired from his position. And was that like a year or two ago?
I don't even know.
It was a significant amount of time ago. It wasn't like yesterday. But since then, he has come out and done his own interviews and had his own conversations about his experience and sort of highlighted some of the bad practices of Fox News, in that there was a lot of cherry picking of information, and he was expected to uphold, united beliefs that represented Fox News' agenda and what they wanted to push out as news. And, some of that he has said, are things that he does still agree with. Some of it is things that he sort of opened his eyes to after the fact and realized just how manipulative not just Fox News is, but media in general can be. And so, I didn't write him off completely. I was encouraged to hear that several times during the episode he did, place blame on, Republicans and Democrats, the right wing and left wing, because honestly, everyone has their faults. It's a matter of, who you think is going to do the best to represent you and what you want. And that's, hopefully that won't come in too much during our conversation, but I just wanted to be totally transparent because I would feel disingenuous if I didn't alert you to my bias.
Well, I think one of the things that I have written down that I can just kind of go through a little bit was a first big section of this podcast was them putting out statistics. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of these things, but I feel like just hearing them one after the other was just, I would say, shocking almost in a sense to hear some of them. For just context, some of the statistics that they mentioned was, 74% of Americans are overweight or obese, which that is a mind-blowing statistic in itself. Mm-hmm. Like, 75% of Americans, like, that's wild to think about. 50% of children are overweight and obese. 50% of adults have diabetes or prediabetes. 18% of teens have fatty liver disease, which they said, which again, we haven't looked into, like, making sure everything is accurate. I mean, I'm assuming most of it is obviously founded on studies, but, they said that the 18% of teens that have fatty liver disease used to be only seen in late-stage alcoholics at one point. So, they mentioned that cancer is up 79%, 25% of women are on antidepressants, 40% of 18-year-olds have been diagnosed with mental health disorders. Autism rates are 1 in 36, which it used to be in 2000 was 1 in 1,500. Infertility rates have been dropping 1% every year. 26% of women have PCOS. So those were a few that kind of stood out to me that I found just very jarring to hear so laid out bluntly.
Yeah, no, it's definitely... There was definitely a reason they started the episode with that, right? Like, it is shock value, and it wants you to stay and listen to hear more about how could we possibly have gotten to this point. I will say that I think for me and just the way I look at things, one thing that I was trying to keep in mind as I was listening to those, right? Because immediately off the bat, that is like a disheartening set of numbers to listen to. But something that I was trying to remind myself is that, let's use like the autism rates as like an example. How many people were checking for autism in 2000? how many people knew what autism, I mean, I didn't know what autism was in 2000. Like, I don't remember anyone, like, talking about it. And while I'm not denying that these things are becoming more prevalent, I think one of the other reasons the shock value numbers are there so much is because more people are thinking to check for it. Whereas a quiet kid who was, like, really into his, like, hyperfixation things in 1990 probably would have just been called quirky.
Yeah.
Now they're getting diagnosed with autism. And so I do think that some of the numbers might just be from the prevalence of understanding what those things are. I think PCOS is probably another one where it's probably existed for a really long time. Maybe not in the numbers we're seeing now, but women have almost never been believed about their pain, their experiences, especially when it comes to their reproductive health. And so for a long time, women probably had some form of PCOS, but were they being believed when they said they were in pain? Were they being taken seriously when they said they wanted to know what was going on? Because they said, too, in one of the points they made was that, like, doctors don't even know what PCOS is a lot of times because I think it is, like, such not a new condition, but it's newly talked about.
Yeah.
And so, not to discredit any of the numbers, but something that made me feel maybe a little bit better is, like, anytime there's, like, an awareness brought to something and people are like, oh, me too, that's me. I recognize that in myself. The numbers go up just because more people can put a name to it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely think that all factors need to be considered, but I think overall, in general, we are seeing an increase in these things.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just whether it is our food, our lifestyle, things like that. Because even just taking into account, like, 74% of Americans being overweight. Yeah. And they talked about, you know, 100 years ago, if someone was obese, it was, like, considered this, like, massive
spectacle.
Like, yeah, spectacle. And, like, it was not very heard of. And the fact that now 75% of people are overweight or obese, obviously you have to look at, you know, why that is and what is going on. Yeah.
And that's like that, like the obesity, the diabetes, the fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
Like some of those things that are a little bit more trackable in the sense that, like, the metrics for those haven't changed over the years. I think those ones are definitely good indicators that
we have a problem.
That that something in the system is broken.
Yeah.
But some of the other things, I do think it's important to tease out, like, how much of it is just awareness and people feeling comfortable talking about it, and then also just pure developments in, especially, like, women's health.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure that there's probably a bunch of women's health issues that are happening right now, but won't be named for 20 years because no one's paying attention to them or believing that women are experiencing them.
Yeah.
So it's definitely... But there's definitely an issue. And I think it's very clear that the systems that we have are not set up for us to be healthy.
Yeah, and obviously I have this point later on, but it kind of goes along with this. I think one of the big measurements of that is puberty rates.
Yeah.
And how, you know, it used to be normal. 16 was kind of 16 was the normal age for girls to reach puberty, and now the average is 10 years old. Which,
that was shocking.
Which I already knew that, but to hear it again, just being laid out for me and, you know, expressed the way that it was, I think is very, again, disheartening to see it like that.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of evidence that we are moving away from our body's innate ability to regulate itself. And early on in the conversations that Casey and Calley were having, one of the things that, again, was another point that they brought up in a few different ways, but I think for me, this was something that I fully agreed with, and I thought was definitely something worth noting, and I'm glad they brought it up in several different ways, but was the fact that doctors aren't trained to look at the whole body, and there's a huge focus on specialization And one of the things that they said was the way healthcare makes money is to send you to 10 different doctors, put you on 10 different meds, and give you 10 different surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who has gone through, different coaching certifications and programs and, looks at a lot of like root cause type of things, that's something that I was always told to like talk to my clients. It's like, it's not just about like fixing this part and this part and this part and this part. It's like, okay, where in the whole system it's all being driven from probably the same fear or the same hesitancy or the same lack of knowledge. And so if we can get to that one root cause, everything else is going to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last 2 decades, I would say we've really moved into specialized healthcare as opposed to holistic whole body healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And if there is holistic healthcare, it is not covered by insurance. No. It is not usually affordable to the everyday, middle class American. I would love to go to a naturopathic doctor, but to go through the process of not only going to the doctor, but then following through with the blood work and, maybe the supplements that they, have you take after, going through your blood work, or the interventions to kind of get you back into this place of, more of this metabolic health that we're talking about, is expensive, and it's not easily accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've always seen the power in like collaboration, and personally, I am a firm believer that one of the like main root causes of like problems in America in general is an overemphasis on individualization and a move away from community and the strength of the many as opposed to the will of the one. And I think that's like very eerily reflected in how we do healthcare. Is like, if you can isolate all these different pieces, it keeps you on that treadmill because you're not addressing the root cause. You're not finding the strength of your body being able to work harmoniously. You're shutting systems off from each other. You're only addressing one thing at a time. But when you take a medicine to help with your high blood pressure, it's causing kidney dysfunction. And then when you take a medicine for your kidney dysfunction, it causes lung problems. And so it just makes this revolving door. Whereas if you looked at the power of like the whole, you would not have to be on any of those medications theoretically. And I think for me, I see that just like societally as well. Like the more separate and individual we make ourselves, the less we're able to like come together to find solutions and find community, which is another method of healing is community and being able to feel supported and valued and loved. And so I found that kind of interesting too, that they were very adamant that, the individualization and the specialization in healthcare is such a big issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think they even mentioned too, like you were saying earlier, is that it's such like this high power status to be like, this
specialized.
like, this person that works on this one part of your brain that's called some, neurotechnical, whatever, name. And it's like, you hear that and you're like, oh, wow, they must be so smart and so specific. But it's like, that isn't helping us. Like that hyper, focus on just these specific areas when it really, everything is connected.
Yeah. Because there's like that, it's not like a saying, but there's a concept that if you go to a doctor with a stomach ache, if you go to a cardiologist, they're going to tell you it's one thing. If you go to a gastroenterologist, they're going to tell you it's another thing. If you go to a neurologist, they're going to tell you it's a third thing, because that's what they're trained to look at, is like, okay, what brain dysfunction could be causing a stomach ache? What heart dysfunction could be causing a stomach ache?
Yeah.
As opposed to just saying what dysregulation as a whole is occurring. And so within this context of their study and their book and their recommendation, Casey and Calley's argument is that it's metabolic dysfunction that's driving all of these preventable diseases, which was one of the things that I found actually shocking was the concept that it wasn't until post World War II that there were that anyone took medications for like chronic disease. Mm-hmm. Because it's so pervasive in our daily lives now that it's wild to think about a time where like the only time you took a medicine was for like an acute short-term cold or flu or, you know, whatever it is, because it really is just so much a part of our daily lexicon to normalize being on medication.
Yeah, which then kind of led to the one topic they talked about a lot was just how, they talked about specifically Obamacare, but how on paper Obamacare sounds great and how, you know, it's, you know, more access to health insurance for people, lower costs, whatever. But then they kind of talked about how they measured outcomes by the amount of clients who were medicated and on long-term medications, not actual
health
outcomes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
people, I'm having brain farts today, so don't mind me. But
people being healthy was not how they managed or measured success for the doctors and through the insurance companies, which is just like absolutely asinine to think that like people being healthy is not considered success.
Well, because it's not. They lose
money.
You
can't make money on it.
You can't make money on it. Yeah.
And I think that was another thing that was shocking. Because again, like increased access to healthcare should be a thing that is happening. Mm-hmm. But when corporate interests see that they're going to lose profit, right? Because it's not even about losing money. It's about losing profit. Mm-hmm. They're not going to continue to make more money. Mm-hmm. They have to find a way to prevent that. So while more people might have access to healthcare, the healthcare itself gets more expensive because that's how they make back or they partner up with drug companies and then split profits on.
No, don't get me started on Big Pharma.
Seriously.
I have so many issues with Big Pharma, but I know, and they obviously talk about it a lot in here, but even just one of the things that I didn't know was that med school is funded by Big Pharma. Like, I did not know that fact, and that fact, like, doesn't shock me because I know Big Pharma is just, you know, in charge of our entire world and, you know,
100%.
corrupts everything. But, obviously, like, my experience with Big Pharma is a little bit different being in the addiction field. And, you know, so I've seen that side of it, more so, you know, so I have my opinions about Big Pharma in general. But just hearing, like, those statistics, and even they kind of mentioned Pfizer, you know, is one of the biggest opioid makers. Which, again, you know, you hear Pfizer, you think of vaccines, oh, they're supposed to be helping people, good for people, but they're one of the biggest opioid makers, which we all know of the opioid epidemic that has gone on in our country for years. So,
which started as mainly prescribed medications for people.
Yeah. Which I'm not saying it's necessarily correlated, but I looked up, Obamacare started in 2010. And our opioid epidemic started to increase from 2010 to 2011 on.
More people had access, and the way they were measuring success was to put them on drugs. And so why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And they were making, the big they, right? All parties involved were making money. And that's what they wanted to keep doing. And one of the things on that idea of, you know, making money at whatever cost possible, was the idea of keeping or getting children sick. And one of the things that I did very much appreciate about the conversation was Calley, who is the brother and is a Harvard Business School graduate. He worked as a lobbyist for a couple different companies in Washington, but I think he mentioned specifically he worked for Pepsi at one point. I could be misremembering, but he worked for a couple large food and or drug corporations. And he really brought everything back to the idea that it's just like an economic fact, right? Like these companies are not looking at things from a moral stance or a policy stance. Like they are just looking at things from economics, and it is good economics if you are in the business of healthcare to have a child be put on a medication, a lifelong management medication early, because that's a lifetime of them being on these medications. And one of the examples that they used right now is that Ozempic, or the semaglutide injections for diabetes and weight loss, there's pushes right now within Big Pharma in the government to lower the recommended start age of that down to 6 years old.
I know. That was mind-blowing. Can you imagine?
No. As someone who has, like, recently had to take a daily injection of insulin for my gestational diabetes, I can't imagine doing that to a 6-year-old and thinking that that is the right way to handle their health problems.
Well, and I think, but even looking at it, too, the bigger issue is that a 6-year-old should not have diabetes at this point and should not be overweight.
Yeah.
Like, so, yes, this is mind-blowing to begin with, but then again, it's kind of going back to the root of the problem is, why is a 6-year-old overweight and why does a 6-year-old have diabetes?
Yeah.
Which is, again, they're stemming back a lot to our food, which I do agree with. I definitely think, genetics plays a factor in everything, but it does come back to our food system, because also then genetics also has to do with our food system too, because we're passing along these issues in our genes to our kids because of that reason too. So it's a big cycle, but...
Yeah. And I think it was interesting to hear Calley's perspective on just how interconnected the food and drug industry is, and how a lot of times, like, they get you both coming and going, and you pay to get in and start taking this medication, but then they put you on a medication to fix that, or they sell you all of this food that's been highly processed and designed to be addictive. And then they also sell you the medication to help you lose the weight that food made you gain. And so, from my perspective, I have a lot of thoughts on, like, Big Pharma and honestly just big corporations in general. Because I definitely think that there's problems in every part of our structure, right? Our society as America, it's like this has become so ingrained that it, one, feels normal. Like, some of the way they market and the way that they talk about things and the way things are available, some of it, it's so normal that, like, 90% of people are probably not even realizing how much of it is designed to get you coming and going. And I think that I've always been a big believer that, like, greed is the root of every evil in this country. Like, of all things, money drives people to make bad decisions. And that is apparent in the way that they discussed how our governing bodies, like you were talking about the studies for, or the schools getting funding from big food companies and big pharma companies, it's a self-revolving door at a certain point, because you need money to fund studies, and these companies are the ones that have the money. And so if you don't take it from them, where is it coming from? Because these parts of our government are so underfunded that there's only so much that can go around. But then where does the supplement come from? Where are elected officials getting their boat houses or their lake houses and their boats and things? They're getting it from buy-offs from these companies who want things to stay the way they are. And if there were better systems in place to prevent that from being able to happen so much, which is one of the things that they did talk about as solutions, was, like, basically cleaning slate and starting over to, like, move all of the people who have been corrupted out. It can feel so disheartening as a person, like, sitting on this couch, just, like, in a small town in America, to think, like, everything is rigged against me.
Yeah. Which, I think there's so many systematic problems that, unfortunately, like, we may never have control over, and it's just figuring out, like, what can we control and what can we do in our daily life, because kind of like what you said of just, it's become so normalized, these types of things, that, like, as I've started to move towards, like, this lifestyle of, you know, changing out my stuff to non-toxic and, you know, kind of getting into, like, sourdough and, like, wanting to, like, work on building a garden to start, like, canning my own food and things like that, like, when I bring that up to people, people think I'm crazy. And so people judge me, and people have, like, you know, led to these, like, I get these, you know, rolling of the eye and these side glances, and it just goes to show you that, like, me wanting to do that is not, like, it's like the radical thing to do, even though it should be the normal thing to do, to not want to, you know, ingest all this stuff. Like, she mentioned that we eat a credit card's worth of plastic every week. Mm-hmm. And, like, that is just, it's mind-blowing. Like, that is just mind-blowing. And then, you know, when I try to, like, you know, like I said, do all these things to change it over and to try to eliminate those things, again, people think that we're the crazy ones, you know?
Yeah. Well, it also, exactly what you're saying, you have to work adamantly to move towards that lifestyle, mm-hmm. because the norm is mm-hmm. the way things are set up, where it's easy to access packaged foods, mm-hmm. everything, you know, these, like, massive shopping markets where there's always what you're looking for, basically. Because even just from, like, a biological standpoint, there's really not a reason you should be able to buy every type of food all year round. But mm-hmm. again, we've normalized it that, like, that is something that just happens, and that's totally fine. And, you know, I did appreciate too that towards the end, they were talking about how the way things are set up, and that, like, active choice to have to try to move away mm-hmm. from the status quo is very much a privileged thing to do, mm-hmm. because it's time consuming. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of time to look into it. It takes a lot of time to find alternatives. Mm-hmm. It can be very expensive to purchase products, either food or other, you know, household items that are more in line with mm-hmm. a clean, natural, organic, however you want to label it, mm-hmm. approach to life. Yeah. Being able to can and garden and can your own food takes time, takes energy, takes mm-hmm. knowledge. You know, there's so many things that just, again, because of the structures that we have built, people who work paycheck to paycheck, 9 to 5, sometimes more than that, don't always have the ability to do everything. And mm-hmm. so then it becomes like, well, if I can't do anything, I just am going to do nothing. Yeah. And so that was one thing I wish that they would have talked a little bit more about, is more applicable ways that, like, the average American could make switches. Because mm-hmm. they did talk about, you know, like, switching to organic foods or, like, going to a farmer's market. But, I mean, we already have so many food deserts in this country as it is, let alone farmer's market access. You know what I mean? Yeah. For some people, the only place that they can buy groceries is, like, the Dollar General. Mm-hmm. And so you're not finding farm fresh foods at the Dollar General typically. Mm-hmm. And so I would have appreciated, and maybe this is in the book a little bit more than it was in the podcast, because it can feel just, like, apocalyptic to mm-hmm. hear all this negative, and then to hear the solutions are things you don't have access to.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also comes back to that, like, all or nothing thinking, is that, because I feel like I was a little bit this way. I'm like, well, why switch out my toothpaste when I'm using 50 other hair products and face products that are toxic, you know? And so I think understanding that this is also going to be, like, a long-term shift. Like, I have been doing this for almost, like, a year and a half now, maybe even close to 2 years, and I'm nowhere close to where I want to be, but, like, I'm also not going to go out and empty my entire house and replace it with a bunch of stuff, because I don't have the money for that or the resources. And obviously I know I'm more privileged and more of the upper class. This isn't, you know, I'm not, you know, like you said, in a food desert, and, you know, in an area where that's, like, my grocery shopping is, you know, a place like Dollar General or anything like that. But I think understanding that this is going to be a long-term shift. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, which is, I think, again, very counterintuitive to the way American society operates in general. Like, everyone is very about, like, instant gratification, immediate solutions, and so it just feeds that. It really is a break from the norm in so many ways. And one of the things that they talk adamantly about in conjunction was like all this confusion and hardship to move towards this type of life is by design. Mm-hmm. And that's where some of the things that they talked about with the media come in, and like how this is framed, how the ability to ask questions and be curious and wonder why things are the way they are is being more controlled, more censored. And then there is an element of like sort of self-fulfilling prophecy to that too, because people don't like to be challenged. People don't like the cognitive dissonance of having to think that the way they've been doing things for their entire lives is wrong, or that they are somehow complicit in their poor health. And so it can lead to like a fielding of like echo chambers of people who just like they don't look for the answer. They just look for things to confirm the answer they want. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, was interesting when they were talking about just how much big pharma specifically pays to places like Google and major news corporations to be able to influence what type of information is either widely spread or the way it's framed. And, you know, again, it's just eye-opening.
Yeah. And kind of jumping back to like the nutrition side of it, one of the things that they mentioned was, you know, we're just not taught nutrition in a sense that, yes, in grade school you're taught like the, you know, pyramid, the food pyramid, you know, and all that, which has been debunked in itself. But
because it was paid for by the food companies.
But anyways, she kind of mentioned that like 80% of medical schools don't even have a class on nutrition, even though food is one of the, you know, leading causes of all these, you know, issues that we're having. But then I was thinking about it on my side of it too, is just as a therapist in the mental health side of it, we know that food plays an impact on our mental health. Yeah. But in school for counseling and therapy, we also don't have a class on nutrition. Like, that's not a thing that is more widely, like, accessible. And even when it comes back to nutrition, too, like, as a kid, yes, you're taught nutrition, but you're also in 6th grade where you don't care that much. Like, when you go into high school, you go into college, like, unless you're specializing in a field that has to do with that, you're not taught those things again. So, like, once you're at an age where, like, you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and maybe, you know, that becomes more interest to you to learn about, like, yourself, they're not taught.
Right, because that's when you also start, like, cooking for yourself, maybe, and, like, having to seek out your own food sources, because, you know, typically up until you're 18 and out of high school, someone else in the household is purchasing the food, preparing the food, you know, obviously not in every case, but in a lot of cases. And so you're right. And another barrier, right, to finding access to this care is because there are nutritionists, dietitians that do specialize in this. But again, it's separated. It's separated into its own field with its own specialty. Again, the individualization.
Unless you seek out a nutritionist, it's not something that is part of your, you know, going to see your
and that's
doctor
additional time, additional resources. It's only been within the last, like, couple years that nutritionists / dietitians have started to be accepted as insurance claims. And so if you're lucky enough to have insurance, it's only recently that you've been able to use that insurance, because otherwise it's an out-of-pocket expense that can be very expensive and, again, feels very privileged. And being able to have access to see how food impacts your health shouldn't be a privileged thing to only have access for, you know, the rich and the wealthy, who, again, are probably the least people that need it at this point, because they also have access to the healthy foods and the time to cook, or, you know, depending on how rich and wealthy, someone to cook for you. You know, these are the same people that, you know, are in less need of that resource specifically, of a professional to help coach and train and educate people on how health or food is medicine and how health is impacted by food.
And it also has to be something that you want to seek out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, obviously, we've been more immersed in this because it is something that we have decided this is important to us,
right.
and, like, holistic health and just our own well-being and wanting to better ourselves, but some people are not in that place where they're seeking out this information, and if you don't seek it out, it's not accessible to you unless you're really looking for it.
Because if you were just like the average person going to the doctor for, again, a stomach ache, it would probably never even occur to you that, like, not necessarily the amount, but, like, the types of food and the quality of your food might be impacting your health, because it's not really talked about. It might be like, oh, well, you know, you are a little bit overweight, so try to lose some weight and that might help. There might be small, like, very surface level types things that we talk to your general physician about, but food as medicine would never be something that would come up as, or I should say, very rarely would be something that would come up.
And they just go, oh, you're overweight, you need to just, you know, make healthier choices and exercise. Like, that is their advice. Yeah. Like, okay, but what does that mean? Like, exactly. You know, what does making healthier choices actually mean, you know? And
there's so much nuance that goes into it, right? Because a healthier choice for me and you would look probably different than a healthy choice for someone else, someone of a lower class, someone who has less time and resources versus, you know, someone who is, you know, more wealthy than us, has more resources than us. And I think that's another sticking point too, is that the way the media portrays, you know, if you see it on TikTok and these people that have this aesthetic and talk about this health, it looks so unattainable. And to go from, you know, eating fast food 5 times a week and drinking, you know, 2 liters of soda a week and, you know, never eating a single vegetable, the idea to go from that to what their perception of a healthy diet is can be so overwhelming that it just becomes easier to not do it. Yeah. And so I really appreciate, there's like a few people that I follow on different forms of social media that really just highlight that a healthy choice for you is a healthy choice for you. Yeah. And there's a creator on TikTok that I really enjoy. His name is Liam. And one of the things that he talks about is exactly that point where if the only way that you'll drink more water is by putting a Crystal Light packet in it, put the Crystal Light packet in it, because for you, that's a healthy choice. It shouldn't be that way forever. Yeah. But if you've never drank water before, that's a better option than drinking soda. If you hate vegetables, unless you dip them in ranch, because at least you're still getting the fiber, the vitamins, the things you need. And then eventually maybe you switch it to hummus. And then eventually maybe you just can have them seasoned with salt and pepper. Yeah. But if you only think that the right way to do it is a way that you hate, it's designed to fail. Yeah. And that's, I think, something that is, again, perpetuated with the media, is that it makes it makes it look so unattainable and unenjoyable. That has to change too. And I'm glad that there's more discourse happening on platforms like Instagram and TikTok where you can have the baby step approach.
Yeah. Well, and I think this kind of goes along with a few different topics we've already talked about, but she mentioned too, which I want to jump, it's kind of further ahead in this, but she just mentioned like the downfall of the feminist movement was kind of that cooking in the kitchen has became beneath people. And I liked that statement because I never really thought about it in that way, but it kind of has become true, because if you think about it, before, you know, women actually started working in the workplace, they were stay-at-home moms, and their job was to be homemakers and to cook food for everybody and to keep up the house and things like that. And we, you know, kind of moved into the society where, you know, women went to work and now work a 9 to 5. And, you know, when you work 9 to 5, it is very difficult to have home-cooked meals all the time. Like, it's very difficult to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner and have the time to do it and work and take care of your kids and clean and all the other freaking million of things we have to do with our lives. But I think, like, that concept, too, then again goes along with community, is then because our parents were the working class, they weren't cooking home-cooked meals, so they didn't teach us how to cook home-cooked meals, so we didn't learn that, and then so we just are doing the best that we can, making quick meals at the end of the day, or pulling something together, instead of actually thinking about, like, how can we make this work in our new society, or is there things that we have to, adjust and go back to, I'm not saying to, go back to, in the 19...
Yeah, you're getting dangerously saying to go back to the kitchen.
No, I don't mean that, but at the same time, like, again, that even just that language, like you said, go back to the kitchen, sounds negative, you know what I mean? It's like this negative connotation of, like, women belong in the kitchen is, like, it's become this phrase that is, like, demeaning, and it shouldn't be, because that's kind of led to a lot of our issues, because if you think about it, if we're not cooking in the kitchen these meals, what are we doing? We're getting fast food, we're getting freezer foods, we're getting boxed meals that we throw in the microwave, like, we're going towards processed foods because we don't do these things anymore.
Yeah. No, I have similar thoughts. I think for me, when I think about that point, I definitely agree that there's less time and energy available to prioritize home-cooked meals.
Yeah.
And I do think that home cooking is becoming a little bit of a lost art.
Yeah.
I will 100% agree with you there. For me, I think where the issue came from is during the push for women to gain equality in the workplace, when they were moving out of just being stay-at-home moms. When women were able to stay at home, it was because we could afford to live on one salary. And regardless of gender, one person could go to work and one person could stay home.
Yeah.
And circling back around to, like, the systems at play and the greed, as more women wanted to enter the workforce, it became more expensive to live.
Yeah.
And so there couldn't be someone to stay at home because you couldn't afford to stay at home with just one income.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you that, like, the art of home cooking is definitely, being put to the wayside, and there's a lot less emphasis on it. There's definitely some measures of, like, seeing, which is interesting because, like, most of the professional chefs in the world are men.
Yeah.
But a woman is always told that, like, her job is to go back to the kitchen and cook and whatever.
This is an interesting,
like, okay, like, it's only demeaning when you don't get paid for it, right? Like, that's when women are supposed to do things, is when they're expected to do it and not get paid for it and not get credit for it, right? In the home with no one looking, stay there. Don't become a chef, stay home and cook. And, like, that's a whole different conversation. But I do think that, again, it was designed to, the greed drove the move towards this processed food, right? Because they saw an opportunity where it was like, okay, well, if everyone's working, we have to provide a solution to that. And the solution wasn't pay people more money so that someone could afford to stay home or you don't have to work as many hours. It was make the processed foods cheaper, make the food that takes time to prepare more expensive.
Yeah.
And again, it just became the self-perpetuating cycle because it's hard to break out of. It's hard to break that pattern when your ability to just function as an adult in this world is driven by money and not having enough of it. And so being able to take, like, just insert something in to break that cycle, whether that's attention, knowledge, time, money, all of those things are valuable, and whatever way you can apply it to break into that cycle, there are ripple effects that will come from it. But I think, again, it's confusion by design, and it's made to look unattainable.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've hit a lot of different points. I don't know if there's anything more specific that you wanted to hit, but we did talk about, like, solutions, and I guess I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about, the system is broken, obviously, and there's a lot of things that we have no control over, but in general, what do we feel like are solutions to what we can do, like, in our day-to-day life to solve this problem for ourselves, I guess, even if we can't solve it in the grand scheme of the state and, country, but...
Yeah, I mean, I will say, as far as systemic things go, it is an election year. I'm not going to tell anyone who to vote for, but I will say one of the best things you can do is at local levels and state levels, Vote for people that you've never heard of, because no one talks about local elections, that have your best interests at heart, right? No one talks about, like, the mayoral race or the state senators. But, like, those are the people that have huge impacts on your day-to-day. The president of the country can do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it's your local representatives that have the power to more immediately impact your day-to-day life. So as we move through an election season, don't just focus on voting for the president. Don't just focus on voting for your, like, senators in the, United States Congress. Look at your local Congress, your state Congress, your local officials, your, county representatives, people like that, because they can bring change to your communities in a much faster pace. So systemically, that's something that right now we do have the ability to do, is research, look into your candidates, and vote in a way that feels aligned with your goals.
I think that is very true, which I don't think most people, like I've never voted for a city, like, any official. Yeah. Like, couldn't even tell you their names. Like, it is something that I definitely have to, like, do more research and, like, be more educated about.
Yeah, because, I mean, again, it's not going to fix everything, but the more we can try to put people into positions of power that align with our interests and our goals and the way we think things should be done, the easier it becomes to then make those more individualized changes, because you're not fighting against the current so much, because the current might start to look a little bit more in the direction you want to go.
Yeah. And just, like, obviously, I know I've talked about this before, is I think getting away from spending our free time, like, there's definitely a time and a place for, watching your favorite shows and, playing video games or, scrolling on your phone. But I think we've gotten into a position where, like, we spend so much time doing that. Like, we spend probably so many hours a day, a month, a year that we can, even cutting that in half to just learn how to cook a few new foods, or to, learn a new skill, or, kind of dive into some of these, like, lost arts a little bit. Yeah, so just kind of spending more time doing things that are going to lead you more towards your goals, instead of spending more wasted time. Because definitely, don't get me wrong, there are days when you're running around with your head cut off and you really don't have the time for some of these things, but sometimes that is an excuse, and we say we don't have the time for things, even though we're spending our time watching Netflix for 4 hours at the end of the night instead of doing something else. So you definitely can make more time for things that are important to you.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, like, an honest conversation about, like, what you value and how you, like, the intentions of how you spend your time.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing inherently wrong with watching a new show on Netflix. But there is something wrong with allowing watching 6 hours straight of Netflix to interfere with something that you claim to value and not dedicating the time and attention to. And some of that is just, again, being honest about what is important to you.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, I really like playing video games, and I also like that it's a time where I can spend time doing something I enjoy with my husband and some of our friends. Like, that to me is, within moderation, not wasted time, because it's a way for me to engage, with my husband and my friends. But if I were doing nothing but that 24 hours a day, then it would be impeding my ability to put emphasis on other things that I value.
Yeah.
And using that, as an excuse to not make change to my routines or my habits in order to, build up more of the things that I want. And I think we talked about a little bit about this at the end of last episode, of utilizing social media and the internet as a way to feed what you value as opposed to just doing it mindlessly.
Yeah.
And so using, again, like TikTok, looking up people who are doing sourdough so you can get tips and tricks on how to better improve yours, or how to map out gardens in a small space, or, nutritional experts or people who have, passion in that area to teach tips and tricks on how to make the best of whatever, ingredients you have or have access to. The emphasis on your value and what is important to you, and then utilizing the resources and the time that you have to feed what you want to grow.
Yeah, and I think recognizing that anything is going to be a slow process when you're trying to break habits that have been instilled in you for so long. So obviously, you know, we've been kind of pushed in this processed food direction. Like, you're not going to turn around tomorrow and only go to farmer markets and only eat meat and vegetables and fruit. Right. Like, it's just not going to happen. So reminding yourself that small changes in that direction over time are going to lead to bigger changes and more lifestyle changes. So even just deciding, okay, I'm going to make a home-cooked meal 2 times a week, you know, and starting there and, you know, switching out. Maybe I can't switch out all of my pots and pans, but I'm going to get, you know, one stainless steel pan from the thrift store, you know, and I'm going to change it out for this one. And being okay with things not all happening at the same time and making small decisions that kind of move towards whatever it is that you're trying to adjust when it comes to, like, non-toxic living or changing your food habits and leaning more towards organic foods away from processed foods.
Yeah, and I think right now, you know, obviously the big pharma stuff is stuff that probably feels very out of control for a lot of people. But I think one solution that we can implement in our day-to-day is just knowledge. And, you know, we are fortunate to live in a time of the internet. And again, not saying that anyone can't or shouldn't be on medication, because I am on medications. But I think it's important to understand where these things are coming from and potential possible, maybe not alternatives, but even just looking at it as, like, ways to help maximize the effectiveness of those medications, right? Like, I'm not telling anyone to go out and, like, stop their high blood pressure medication tomorrow because someone on the internet told you to. But if you also know that a daily walk after dinner can help you with your circulation and may reduce blood pressure, the more you start building up some of these other more helpful habits, potentially at the end of this long process, you might reduce your dosage or maybe not have to take them at all. And so it doesn't have to be an either or. Yeah. And being able to kind of blend the approaches right now, because we are operating within a society that's set up to prioritize medication and cheap processed foods. And so finding that blend, like you're saying, one little thing at a time, it's still a reduction in the bad and an increase in the good. And so, you know, talking with your doctor about maybe some alternative lifestyle things, they may not bring them to you up front, but if you ask for them, they might be able to give you some ideas. If you're lucky enough to have insurance that covers a nutritionist. I mean, I worked with a nutritionist for a long time, and I found it very beneficial for me. You know, and understanding what's the most important and, you know, biggest rock for you. Yeah. And not letting other people tell you that what is important to you is the wrong thing to focus on.
Well, and along with, like, that knowledge is just getting curious and being okay with asking questions. I think sometimes when we go to the doctors, they're like, you know, even when it comes to, like, vaccines, like, you kind of just go, you know, oh, your daughter's here for her 3 vaccines. And instead of being like, okay, well, what are they? You know, what are they for? You know, do they need to be given, you know, at this time? Do they need to be given all together? Like, and, you know, they might not have all the answers for you, but then at least you know what it is and you can go back and do your own research too. And I think sometimes we're afraid because we think, well, they're the experts. Like, you know, we should just do what they say instead of, like, being okay with being able to, like, ask questions and being curious about our own health.
Yeah, because if nothing else, you know, if you do decide to go forward with the vaccines in this example, great. Yeah. Then you asked your questions. You were satisfied with their answers. You trust that person that was giving you the answers. And you feel like you made the best decision you can for you and your family. But I think a lot of times people hear questions and immediately are framing it as confrontation. Yeah. Or that they need to be defensive. And I think one other thing that we can do in our daily lives is, like you were saying with the curiosity, but promote curiosity in conversation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times everyone gets so afraid of being wrong that they fight tooth and nail to prove that they're right, as opposed to just being open to the idea that things might be different than what you've understood. And that's not a sign of stupidity. That's a sign of growth. That's a sign of progress. That's a sign of just life moving forward. Like, you know, I'm a firm believer in the power of science. And, you know, I think there has to be a blend of things, right? Because I'm not trying to die from polio. There's no reason to die from polio anymore. We have eradicated that through the power of technology. But do I think everything needs a pill or a vaccine? No. So, like, finding a balance of being able to eat, you know, an Oreo for dessert while also, you know, pairing that with a salad at dinner so you get your fiber in, there has to be a balance. And being able to not look at things with judgment, but with curiosity is a huge just mindset shift that people can make that makes the biggest difference in their day-to-day. Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is one of the very last points that Casey brought up about how she eats and the way that she eats is she blesses her food, which I found very interesting. And I'm always a big fan of people who can blend the, like, science with the mystical. And one of the things that I learned about in my coaching training was the power of, like, setting intention with your food and when you prepare it. And as you're talking about, like, the lost art of cooking, I think that is definitely part of what's missing is, like, the intention and, like, the idea of, like, cooking with love. Because it's not grown with love right now. Yeah. If you buy it from, like, a conventionally grown, like, grocery store. But you have the power to put that back in. And if nothing else, just eating with intention. Yeah. Sitting down at a table, eating a meal, focusing on the meal, not shoveling it in while you watch an episode of Netflix. And trying to instill that maybe a couple times a week where you sit and just really think about and enjoy and be present with your food.
Well, and family. And that comes back to, like, the community side of it, too, is, like, doing that with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there is a huge soul-fulfilling thing of community-based meals. And, you know, community is something that's very important to me. I think it's one of the biggest scams of the 20th century that moved us away from being a community and having a village and having, you know, a group of people to help share the burden of life with. Yeah. And the more we can try to bring that back in whatever ways we can. Yeah. I don't know if they talked about it in this podcast or if I saw it in a different documentary, just about the, like, reduced frequency with which families eat meals together. And I mean, there were times when my family used to eat dinner at, like, 9:00 at night after games and sports practices and events or whatever. But it was always a huge priority of my parents to, like, sit down as much as we could as a family and eat. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of power in that and a lot of good energy that comes from eating, preparing, cooking, enjoying food with love.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed our takes and opinions of this other podcast.
Yeah, there was one section we didn't get to, but that's because Danielle and I are planning on doing a whole separate episode about hormonal birth control. They did talk about that kind of in conjunction with a lot of these things, but we're planning on doing an episode about that as a standalone because we both have a lot of opinions and experiences to share as women who have been on and transitioned off of hormonal birth control. So in case you listen to the original podcast, you're like, you didn't talk about this. We're gonna, just not in today's episode. So, but yeah, share your thoughts with us. Let us know. Do you think that, you know, food is the cause of all of this?
Do you think Big Pharma is ruining our lives?
How can we take control back in our actions day to day? You know, share with us. Follow us on Instagram at Sorona Society 716. I'll put it in the show notes as well so you can follow us there. And if you're interested, there's still some time in September to hop on the reading bandwagon. And you can keep an eye out for our future reading challenges / book clubs coming through the end of the year. And any way that we can build community, anything that you guys want to hear about, see about, learn about, let us know. We love to give you what you're interested in. So.
Yep. Sounds good. That's it for today.
All right, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Adios.